As you can hear, this meeting is being recorded, and we will continue the discussion. And if you feel that things should not be recorded, then we can turn off the recording. We want to be able to have a fruitful discussion as we can. So we're just going to wait a minute or two more for the participants to come. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Peter.
We're going to restart the recording. Like I said, at any point, if you want us to stop the recording, we can do that. We have an exciting webinar today, so if you could keep yourself on mute, you're welcome to join and participate at any time. We have really two amazing facilitators, and we're really lucky to have them leading this discussion today on student recruitment support and retention best practices, especially important during this time of COVID. So I think most of you are familiar with NACC, but I just want to take a couple of moments to share about that. If you could go to the next slide, Peter. We're an international membership organization. We're academic centers and nonprofit academic programs at accredited colleges and universities, and we are an international organization. So we have member centers and programs across the globe, and we offer these professional development webinars monthly, as well as a variety of other conferences and some summits and curricular guidelines. And moving on to the next slide, our two presenters are very actively involved in NACC. Peter Weber currently serves on the board of directors. He's the secretary of the board. He's also assistant professor at Auburn University in philanthropy and nonprofit studies. He received his PhD in philanthropic studies from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis. And our second presenter, Carol Brunt, an active member as well. She's on the curricular guidelines committee. She is an assistant professor at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and she earned her PhD in developmental management from University of Manchester. So I'm going to hand it over to them. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand, speak up.
All right, thank you, Heather. So how we structured our presentation or workshop today is Carol and I will kind of bounce back and forth without really separating our two presentations. We'll first introduce a little bit, give more background about ourselves. Then we want to talk a little bit about some macro trends in higher education, how they affect nonprofit studies programs. And then we'll talk about three specific case studies and challenges that three programs have faced in or are facing in recruiting students, and some of the strategies we have developed to address those challenges, and then look long term to see where we are going from now. And please, at any time, if you have questions, comments, just jump in. We would like to avoid the typical Arnova or NACC conference presentation style and have a much more interactive conversation if possible. A little bit of background about myself, and Heather highlighted the key points. The reason I wanted to include this slide is over the course of the past 10-15 years, I've been involved in different types of nonprofit programs in two different countries, Italy and the United States. And the one thing that maybe the most clearest to me emerged as I joined Auburn University recently is just how diverse and different these programs are, and how those differences are really rooted in the traditions and types of universities. We all might teach nonprofit management, nonprofit studies, or philanthropic studies, but the way I had to speak, or I have to speak to the university leadership at Auburn University, is completely different from the way I used to speak to the leadership at Murray State University. At the same time, also the way I interact with my students is completely different. Murray State and Auburn, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, are maybe at the polar opposites in terms of type of students. Murray State has, to a good degree, a first generation type of student coming from a rural area in Western Kentucky. Auburn University is a much larger university. We are heavily dependent on out-of-state students. Almost half, 40% of our students are out-of-state students. And the average income of our 8 out-of-state students in terms of household is $350,000. So the way I interact with students here is completely different from the way I interacted with students, first generation students at Murray State. And only kind of this transition from Murray State to Auburn made me aware of all those kind of nuances and differences. So as we talk about the different cases, I think we need to keep in mind the diversity of institutions and the diversity of student bodies that we are targeting for recruitment. Carol?
Okay, I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of information background about myself. Most of you may already know a good part of this. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and England. And it's interesting when Peter talks about his transitions and understanding of nonprofit and how he interacts with students depending upon which institution he's at. My experience with the nonprofit sector has really evolved, I guess, over my entire career. For 30 years, I've been working with the nonprofit sector in one form or another. And it does differ in how we define it, how we shape it, how we understand it, whether you're talking about Canada and the various forms of nonprofit organizations that we have there, or in Britain, where we're talking much more about the voluntary sector and how we understand those organizations, then again differs from some of the definitions, some of the scope, some of the shape of what it looks like here in the US. Much broader definitions, as you know, of the nonprofit sector here in the US than in other parts of the world. And my trajectory began working in industrial relations, with nonprofit organizations. I still do a lot of research in employee relations in nonprofit organizations. And when I joined Whitewater, the University of Wisconsin, we did not have a nonprofit management program. It was the foresight of our former dean, who was looking to develop something in a dean within a business school, nonetheless, to develop something in the shape of a nonprofit. And so studies program. And so over the last 5 years, that's sort of what's morphed and developed on our campus. And I began as the director, and we're pleased today to say that we now have an Institute of Nonprofit Management Studies, including a nonprofit minor. So from starting with nothing to now having a growing, shall I say, and expanding nonprofit management studies program. We're quite pleased about that. So again, a different trajectory, how I compare my experience from where I come from to where I am today. Slightly different than what Peter was mentioning about, but that's why we collaborate together. I guess the next slide will tell us a bit about the literature. Could you advance to the next? Sorry, I forgot about the pressing questions. There's really 3 kind of pressing questions that kind of drive our conversations today, and our thinking sort of evolving out of our research together. Peter and I thinking about how, and again, these are questions that probably, are important for all of you on the call today. And please feel free to jump in with other questions you might have on the topic. we kind of framed the first question around how to recruit undergraduate students as they explore a range of institutional options. That's very much driven from the fact that, at least from my perspective, graduate students are much more purposive in terms of their focus and why they're going to choose to do graduate studies. They're not so much shopping around for a program the way you find undergraduate students, particularly at the freshman level. It can be quite overwhelming, particularly when you're joining an institution as large as Auburn with the variety of programs that are out there. So how do you focus their attention and bring them along to want to study the nonprofit sector? And then the next question is really, how do you retain them once they're there? There's a lot of variety, as I said, in terms of programming, but also in this time of COVID, it's been very difficult for students to continue on with their education, whether that's financial, whether that's other personal reasons, etc. I, over the past year, have seen a big variance in terms of how students participate, how they engage in the same classes that I've been teaching now for 5 years. And particularly when you think, in addition of underrepresented students coming from backgrounds, we have 40% of our students at UWW are first generation. Again, how do you retain them to completion? And then I guess the third question is really, what is that role for academic centers, a research area that Peter and I've been really focusing on for the last few years? What is that role of those centers in fostering student retention? Certainly, when you look at a center and what it's offering in terms of focusing on effective teaching, research, and community co-production, those tend to be some of the elements that you can really bring together under the umbrella of an academic center that help with student retention. And so those are kind of the questions that are framing our presentation today. So in terms of literature, Peter and I've done a lot of, a number of studies that have gathered information from academic centers across the country, finding out what works, what doesn't work. We've had a range of interviews with various stakeholders. I was really keen to also bring to light here some of the best practices that's in the literature to help kind of frame the discussion today. And so these ideas and explorations around best practices aren't necessarily coming from the nonprofit sector per se. They're from the broader academic field, but as I said, they do provide us with something of a framework to think about where we are today. And we, in talking about student recruitment and retention, we'd be remiss if we didn't have social media right up there as a topic that needs to be explored. And the use of social media, as we know, is becoming certainly much more prevalent. As institutions are looking to attract students, international students globally, and certainly post-COVID, wanting to attract those students back to our institutions who may have been absent over the last year and a half. Also regionally within the US, here in Wisconsin, we're not only reliant on students from our own state, but we're also drawing in from Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, etc. And so social media does tend to really help as a recruitment practice. There's a recent study by Marasova in 2020 that tells us that institutions that mirror the social media practices of the world's top 10 universities have been really effective in managing their brand image. It really helps build that strategy. And another survey piece of 336 higher education institutions worldwide in six very different countries around the world, done by Cullen in 2018, tells us that building a social media governance network across the campus really helps, so that you're not working in little silos according to each program. You're very much having something that's consistent and brings together a common messaging. When we think about teaching, I go back to that issue of underrepresented, perhaps even underprivileged students that are studying on our campuses. How do we maintain their engagement with the program? How do we, even once we get them recruited, how do we retain them? And Guzzardo and others have just released a really informative paper talking about best practices, and they really focus in on quality student-faculty relationships and that building of effective teaching through creating pedagogical space, being really inclusive and aware on the part of the faculty about what students need, and being engaged with students. And I guess the fourth best practice that they refer to is in fact where faculty should be doing more than teaching. That's where they are very much engaging with their students, and bringing that all together really highlights the importance of faculty engagement with students for ensuring student success. And then lastly, I'll just focus on a third point that really struck me in looking at all these best practices was this issue of advisory committees, because certainly the participation of active nonprofit leaders on your advisory committees tends to be a real win-win situation, because those members come with the ability to offer internships, employment opportunities, real life experiential, experience that they can share with students, either one-on-one, where you create mentoring relationships. But one of the things that tends to be lacking in terms of these advisory committees is that member composition, actually roles and responsibilities specifically within these advisory committees, very much structuring them along the shape and form of what a board might look like in a corporate world, so that you actually get the most out of your members. And I think while that sounds very prescriptive, in these days of having to now really specifically focus our thoughts on student recruitment, student retention, for the well-being of our programs, we have to start to be more intentional in some of these ways. So I want to leave that with you as some of the sort of literature that shapes our conversation, and I'll let Peter move on to talk about start us off with the case studies.
Before we jump into the case studies, here are a list of different challenges that in conversation with colleagues and in conversation with Carol, we find applying to nonprofit studies programs in general. And I'd like to differentiate here between macro challenges or macro factors and micro factors. So micro factors, in my mind, are characteristics that are peculiar to a specific nonprofit program. While macro factors, the ones I list here as an example of different factors, are more broader factors and challenges that affect nonprofit studies programs. Trends in higher education, one of the key problems that Murray State University faced recently was the steady decline of state appropriations. We were in ongoing struggle to recruit students, to bring tuitions and bring money in, because otherwise they would have cut the program. Murray State University, in my 5 years I was there, switched from a 70-30%, 70% state appropriations, 30% fees, to a 30% state appropriation, 70% fees budgetary model. That had huge implication for the functioning of a nonprofit studies program. The second piece that I think is important to consider, and that is something that came up as I transitioned from Indiana University, the School of Philanthropy, to Murray State, is the geographical location of the university and the type of nonprofits that geographical location serves. Students at Murray State typically stay in Western Kentucky. They stay in that area. They are going to be employed by small nonprofits with 1 or 2 staff members that rely on practices that fundraising practices, for example, that often we in our classes discourage nonprofits from. Now, I talk often in my nonprofit classes about death by fundraising events. Well, in Western Kentucky, all the nonprofits are doing are fundraising events. So there is a kind of tension between the best practices we offer students in class and the reality of the sector, of the local sector. And that has influences to how we can attract and place students in that context. Universities' traditions have a major impact on the ability to recruit students. In conversations with colleagues, we found, for example, that religious-based institutions that have a strong emphasis on service can show a clear alignment between the mission of a nonprofit studies program and the overall mission of the university. And then there are a series of challenges that are more specific to our own program. Nonprofit studies is a relatively new field. And when I have had the opportunity to speak with students in high schools, there are so many myths that you have to dispel because they are not used to have student counselors talk to them about professional opportunities in the nonprofit sector. All they hear about are the traditional disciplines, and they are not aware that there is a career path in the nonprofit sector or philanthropic sector, which results in our programs being so-called discovery programs. Most of our students, both at Murray State and at Auburn Universities, are students that join the university pursuing a degree in some other major, and then suddenly they take a class in a nonprofit studies program, discover the major, and if we do a good job, they change their major into nonprofit studies, which is good for us, but creates also internal tensions because you are, in particular at Murray State, where we are under with budgetary constraints, you are stealing students from other programs. And then a last piece about recruitment strategies. There is always a tension because our programs are typically located in larger university structure, university units that don't know much about nonprofit studies. So in addition to educating students and parents about what nonprofit studies is as a field, you also have to educate university recruiters about what the field is. So you have this kind of dual educational component. Having this as a background, and again, I can just skip over this, awareness that programs, universities are different along with various factors. Let's jump into the first case study. This is Murray State University. As I kind of hinted before, Murray State is a small regional university in Western Kentucky. It is quite isolated. The next largest city is Nashville. It's 2 hours away in Tennessee. It has around 9,000 students. Numbers are fluctuating, and it's a very strongly teaching-oriented institution. The nonprofit studies program there is actually quite old. It was established as a minor in the mid-80s and became a major in 2011. Enrollment numbers fluctuated when I was there for 5 years between 2014 and 2019. We had around 100 students combining major and minors. And it was going up and down. And it had, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, it changed multiple times institutional locations within Murray State University. So here I cap a few of the specific challenges the program faced. First, the ongoing decline, budgetary decline, made enrollment, recruitment a major priority of the program. Over the course of 5 years, we lost 2 faculty lines. Faculty members retired and were not replaced. We had a large pool of adjuncts, and also that pool of adjunct was significantly reduced. We had multiple significant leadership turnover at the university level, at the college level, at the program level. And because of enrollment declines, budgetary issues, at a certain point towards the end of my tenure at Murray State, we were asked to merge the nonprofit program with the different programs. So there are all those institutional, budgetary, enrollment pressures on the program itself. In terms of strategies, key approaches we took, and to a good degree, one was ingrained in the 20-30 year history of the program, was developing the nonprofit leadership studies program around a clear program identity. The nonprofit program at Murray State was famous, or was well known across the campus for its emphasis on service learning. And actually the program brought the service learning office at Murray State University was born from within the nonprofit studies program. All nonprofit studies courses had a very strong service learning component. And that helped maintaining a strong identity for the program as the program merged with other academic units, shifted from one college to the other college. It used to be based in the College of Education and Human Services and has been recently moved to the College of Business. But all those leadership changes, academic location changes, were survived in a certain way by maintaining a strong emphasis on student learning, service learning, and student philanthropy. The other strategy to address specific challenges in student enrollment was taking a 3-pronged approach to recruitment. First, in the awareness that all nonprofit studies programs are discovery programs, we try to structure the curriculum of the program in a way that favored internal transfers. Our curriculum at Murray State had a list of core courses. Then we had multiple elective courses, and we required 1 minor. The minor and elective courses allowed, the free elective courses allowed us to facilitate the transfer from students from one major to our major, because in that way students did not lose academic credits towards the completion of their academic career. The second approach we took was strengthening connections with high school. That goes to the long-term effort to educate future students, educate high school counselors and teachers about opportunities and careers in the nonprofit sectors. We connected in particular with high schools that had, for example, beta clubs that have a strong emphasis on service learning. And we did multiple presentations and tried to engage students in beta clubs in outreach activities at the college level. We also developed dual credit courses where students at high schools could enroll in our intro class that would give them credit if they would eventually transfer to Murray State University. A third approach of strategies was favor external transfers. Western Kentucky has a very strong community college system, and we developed partnerships, pathways with 5 different community colleges that allowed students to complete 2 years of their studies at the community college and then transfer to Murray State, having half of the degree basically completed. And we made those partnerships with a range of different programs in those community colleges, targeting specifically social service majors. There was a social service program at the community college. We had social welfare programs, all types of programs at the community college that could potentially consider a 4-degree in nonprofit studies as a good professional continuation of their studies. And that was both the connection with high schools and the connection with the community college was something that was relatively easy to set up because we were able as a program and as a department and as a college to make a case of the university leadership that those connections would benefit ultimately the university, not just the program. The dual credit courses for high school students, whether that high school student after taking a dual credit in nonprofit leadership studies would take the major in nonprofit leadership or any other major at Murray State was the same. So there was a direct benefit for the university. The same was true for the partnerships with community colleges, because they supported the overall goal of the university to increase enrollment. So being very clear about the alignment with those recruitment strategies for the specific program with the strategies and goals of the overall goals of the university made it possible to bypass a lot of bureaucratic hurdles and be relatively quick in implementing those strategies. And I should say we implemented those in a moment that I think everybody at Murray State considered a crisis moment because the enrollment of the entire university were dramatically going down. So anything you could do that had the promise to increase enrollment was winning support from the higher administration. So it was in the crisis of the university, there was also the opportunity that gave a little bit more flexibility that maybe would not have been there if everything was going well for the university. The second example is the one of Auburn University, where I'm based right now. As you can see from the brief overview, a completely different situation, large research one institution. We have around 31,000 students, around 25,000 are undergraduate students. It's a public university and a land-grant university in Alabama. The program, PNPS, Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies, is a very new program. It has been launched as a major in 2019. It has existed as a minor, I think, since 2013. one of the peculiarities, and I'll get back to this in a moment, is it is based in the College of Human Sciences within a department of Consumer and Design Sciences, which sounds quite strange. And the other piece to mention, we have a close partnership with the Carey Center for the Advancement of Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies, which is an outreach arm of the College of Human Sciences. It's a land-grant institution, so the outreach part is extremely important. Couple of challenges as a program. It's a new program. It doesn't have a long tradition. That's also an opportunity because we are able to build our own identity in a certain way. The institutional location may sound strange. Human sciences, consumer and design sciences, it's very different from the traditional public administration, business, liberal arts institutional locations. And it has implications for the type of students we get. Our college is to a good degree female. I think 80% of our students in the college are female students. In my classes, over the course of 2 years, I think I had 5 male students. There is a risk for turf fights. Our program is really new, but we have, the College of Liberal Arts has a graduate program in nonprofit studies. And within our college, we have a program, an undergraduate major in global studies. So there are some overlaps with these other programs. As our own program has a sort of a dual identity, we have the focus on philanthropy, but we also have a very strong focus on financial management and financial planning. And this is again a challenge slash opportunity. If you're a little bit familiar with Auburn University, there is this notion that Auburn is different. There is the normal way, and then there's the Auburn way. And every time I try to talk with recruiters or other administrators, a typical answer I get, yes, but that's not Auburn. Auburn is different, which requires an additional work in terms of education. So a couple of strategies, and I've been here only for 2 years now. And because of the size of the university, I'm less involved, actively involved in recruitment efforts. One of the things that Auburn does, and maybe other large universities do, each college has a recruitment office and a student advising office. Undergraduate students are advised by advisors that are not faculty members. And this advising is done by the same people who are also our official recruiters. And students are advised by faculty only when they're actually getting into the senior year. The notion behind it is, as a faculty member, I can help the student in their professional choices as they get closer to graduation. But early on, when it's more in terms of checking off taking the right courses, we have a professional advisor taking care of that, which is great on the one hand, because it kind of takes off my plate a lot of work. On the other hand, because a lot of our students are internal transfers, we are not involved in that early phase of shaping the phase and the public phase of the program. And that also means that part of my, and that is what I would have been doing this morning before our workshop, I was preparing content that faculty advisors and recruiters could use for recruitment purposes. Because our program is so new, and our recruiter, because they're college-based, they don't have any specific expertise in nonprofit studies and philanthropic studies. And that is one of the challenges, and what we have been doing, both I and my department head, is organizing regular meetings with our advisors and recruiters to provide them material that they can use when they go out to high schools or talk with undeclared majors in the college. Another approach we took for a very new program is increase visibility of the program, trying to multiply the moments in which students at Auburn University may encounter the nonprofit studies program. This with the knowledge that it is a discovery program, so if we multiply the chances in which they encounter us, then more students might change the major. The most prominent of these approaches is developing a student philanthropy course in which students throughout the semester give away money. This again is a good strategy because it aligns well with the land granting and outreach mission of the university. So every time we engage students in activity like this, we can get a lot of publicity at the campus level out of it, because it is in the interest of the college and the university to publicize those broader opportunities. The other piece we have implemented recently, with the background knowledge that there is at risk of turf fights between different programs and units across campus. I have engaged in cross-university collaborations and working with different units and trying to be very clear about the niche identity of each of our programs. And so rather than being in competition, to be more collaborative. And this has resulted in our program advertising graduate courses in the MPA program to our students, and the MPA program director advertising our undergraduate nonprofit courses among the political science majors. And we have been very good in finding different ways of collaborating. A third strategy that is based on the type of university we are, a research-oriented, outreach-oriented land grant institution, is trying to engage students in research and outreach. There is a strong push to multiply the way in which students can participate in research projects. The notion is that collaborative research projects, just like service learning, are ways for students to build a sense of community and build links to the community outside the university and within the university, in that way to increase retention and sense of belonging. And because we are a research-run institution, we are fortunate to have plenty of funding opportunities that allow us to engage students in those opportunities. The next case is,
Peter?
yeah?
Peter, just a quick question. You mentioned that you were mostly female. Is that because Auburn's mostly female, or mostly females were attracted to the program?
Auburn, I think, as in general, is pretty evenly split up, but our college, the College of Human Sciences, is mostly female for the type of programs it offers. And to that, I should say, also when I taught at Murray State, the nonprofit studies program, both at Murray State and in Auburn, seemed to attract a primarily female student population. At Auburn, I think it depends that we are still, to a good degree, recruiting within the college. And if the college is primarily female, we get primarily female students. But at Murray State University, it wasn't the case. And still we got a good number of female students. So I think there is, I would be interested to see how it shapes up in different programs.
Yeah.
But in the two cases I was involved, female students are definitely the majority. In Murray State, it was a slight majority. At Auburn, it is an overwhelming majority.
Okay. Thank you.
And to that, I should add the students in our college at Auburn University now are to a very high degree involved with sororities. So the sorority presence at Auburn is very strong, and the sorority presence within the College of Human Sciences is extremely strong, which opens opportunities in terms of recruitment within sororities, because they all have, as you're all familiar, philanthropic projects or the philanthropy chair of the different sororities. So that is something we have historically tried to do, to send representatives of the program to talk with those sororities. Carol?
Thanks, Peter, for those two great case studies. As I listen to, even though I know everything about your previous programs because we've discussed it a lot, listening to it again really highlights how our program at Whitewater, because it is such a new program, has really built on and benefited from the experiences like programs that you've been involved with, because we've tried to deal with some of those competitive issues. So just a brief overview for those of you that don't know, University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, it's a comprehensive university, 2 campuses in South Central Wisconsin. This gives you a size of the scope of the institution. We're almost 12,000 full and part-time students, over 2,500 degrees awarded annually. And if you look at the number of majors and minors, you can see where a nonprofit minor that we have now kind of might get a little lost in there. Our nonprofit minor is new as of the fall of 2019, and our whole nonprofit program, both the Nonprofit Management Studies program itself, as well as the Institute for Nonprofit Management Studies, is supported within the College of Business. So in speaking about gender disaggregation among the students participating in our program, because we're in the business school, the number of students in our program, either male or female, tends to be fairly balanced. We attract quite a number of students coming to our introductory nonprofit studies program course. And then on top of that, we attract students from across campus. And so just to maybe the next slide, Peter, just as I continue to talk about the minor, is to talk about the challenges, of course, as Peter had mentioned, trying to attract students to a new program within a business school, and a new program that's in fact the third leg of the stool, the nonprofit sector or the voluntary sector, or the third sector, if you will, very much, as Peter had mentioned, it being a discovery program, it's not known within the business school, even among my business school colleagues. It's all part of the education process, both for faculty in the business school, as well as the students themselves, to broaden their appreciation of what the nonprofit sector is. It's an ongoing education, whether we're at college meetings, whether we're in departmental meetings. There's a huge part of education just for my faculty colleagues, because while they are not responsible for advising the students per se, they very much are part of those day-to-day relationships with students that might guide them informally into different programs. We're lucky enough at COBE, the College of Business and Economics, to have a standalone advisory department that's responsible for guiding our students and promoting different programs and giving them information and making sure they complete the various core requirements, et cetera, required for graduation. I meet with that advisory department regularly to make sure that they are fully cognizant of what the nonprofit sector is, what our program offers, and what the students can benefit from. Unlike some of the other departments and colleges across campus that have faculty who act as advisors, one of the comments I had around competing with other majors and minors across campus, that is a real challenge for us. One way we've tried to mitigate it, though, in developing our nonprofit minor is to offer that minor both for BBA students, so that it's twigged to only require 5 core courses, because the organizational behavior course that they take is already part of their business school core courses. But students can now come and take our nonprofit minor from anywhere else on campus. The only thing they have to do is take that extra org behavior course. So we have a wonderful interdisciplinary mix of students now from across campus that are taking nonprofit studies, in fact, nonprofit management studies from within our business school frame. As well, we encourage students, we have a range of electives. So we've got social work electives, we've got electives in grant writing that come from our English department. But those faculty very supportive of what we're doing in the nonprofit studies. So because of the nonprofit studies program, we've reached out in growing it and developing it to such an extent that we've really tried to downplay that competition. And so we've got supportive faculty right across the campus who are now tweaking and changing the scopes of some of their courses that they're offering to really focus in on nonprofit studies. So for that, we're really grateful. And the third challenge I wanted to raise was this issue of fundraising. Of course, fundraising being, a constant challenge for any program to be able to maintain itself. However, we haven't fallen into the trap that Peter was referring to with respect to Murray State, because we have had a lot of support from our alumni foundation, from nonprofit organizations who have offered paid internships. And that's where most of our funding goes to, is to offer our students paid internships. Again, trying to dispel that myth that if you work in the nonprofit sector, you're working for free. And so we make sure that our students are all paid $15 an hour in their internships over the 220 hours that they have those internships. And many of our graduates have managed to get positions with the nonprofits that they interned with. So we have a really high placement rate. And so in terms of looking at the strategies that we use, we are integrating both with the university campaigns along with our own college campaigns to promote our program. We also have dedicated contact persons. So if students are looking to develop their internship, which is a requirement of our program, whether it's the minor or the emphasis, there is a specific contact person that they have to be in touch with, our internship coordinator that guides them along, or myself as the director of the academic center. Unlike Peter's relationship at Auburn, where they have that close partnership with the center, our institute and our program are sort of work in hand. We're almost one and the same. We work for the same goals, the same purpose to promote the program. What the institute shape allows us to do is a little more outreach in terms of community co-production. So that's great. I've spoken a bit about the internships, and a big thing is our student engagement as a strategy for retaining our students is we get them really heavily involved in our undergraduate research programs, focused on nonprofit research and fundraising research. I won't go into any more detail. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. I almost feel like our experience at Wisconsin-Whitewater sort of falls between the two experiences that Peter shared from Murray and from Auburn. Ours is a comprehensive regional university, but because we are placed in a business school, we seem to have a little more financial backing that, for at least for the moment, allows us to continue to grow and develop our program without feeling a huge push to, you know, only focus in on fundraising and that. And we are continue to attract students. Our next stage is to go out into the high schools, etc., and get them in at the freshman year. So without further ado, I want to ask Peter just to move on to the strategy around a review of the strategies, maybe briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can leave maybe this slide here up for everybody and kind of open it to comments, discussions.
Sure.
Since I think we have just a few minutes left.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention was the whole thinking more long term, or in fact short term, in immediacy post-COVID. I'd mentioned it to Peter. I really get a sense in talking to our students on campus, our faculty as well, that post-COVID, there's continued growing interest, in fact, ramping up interest in nonprofit management studies. And I'd be interested in hearing what others' experience is on the call in terms of the conversations they're having on campus, student feedback in this new post-COVID world.
Oh, there's a question in the chat.
So I recognize that we're almost at time, and if you have to leave, you can drop off, but we can open up the webinar for another few minutes if you are able to stay and continue this discussion. So, and I saw David's hand was up.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't have a response to the COVID question, but I'm very used, we have paid internships for our graduate students. You were able to do paid internships for your undergraduate?
Yes, that's right.
What level of work were they doing?
They are very involved. It's when they go to work for a local nonprofit, we try to ensure that that position is really meaningful. They're not going to, you know, for administrative tasks or, you know, stuffing envelopes kind of thing. They get right involved in the organization. Obviously, during COVID, that's been a bit of a challenge. But prior to that, they were very involved in the management, depending on their interests too. So for example, if they were assigned to an internship with our alumni foundation on campus, they'd be working on fundraising and philanthropy projects with the alumni foundation. We also had a student who actually became the interim executive director for our one of our regional United Ways when the ED was off on mat leave. And so she initiated the whole fundraising campaign. Obviously, she didn't do it from scratch, but you know, she was able to maintain those relationships and engage and move that program forward. And then that really leveraged her into a position after graduation. And all of our students have come back to us and said, you know, everything that we're learning in the program, and that we get experience within our internship is feeding into where we go in our placements afterwards with graduation. So I hope that answered your question. There's one here from Ray. Ray, your question about the main advantage of a nonprofit studies program being in a college of business versus public affairs or liberal arts. Just in my reading, not because out of my experience has only been in the College of Business, but from what my reading says, when you look at a College of Public Affairs or liberal arts, it may in fact be finances and financial support. In speaking to my dean's been a strong proponent of our program from the get-go and made sure that we had the finances available. Not huge by any stretch of the imagination. The budgets aren't off the charts, but enough, at least some funding to be able to support our internships. We do 2 paid internships per year for our students, along with what we get from local nonprofits as well. So we're placing quite a few students in paid positions, as well as getting some finances up until COVID. I have to say, there has been a financial freeze from the state to higher ed here in Wisconsin. And so that's had some financial impact on our institute and on our faculty in terms of getting the funding to attend conferences. Not that we're traveling these days, but some of that kind of programming, Arnova in the fall, that kind of thing, we're still not sure whether we'll be able to attend in person. So it's a challenge. I can't say outside my own experience, but from my own experience, the main advantage of being in a college of business has been the financial support. So I hope that answers your question, Ray.
We're in a
Alex?
college of liberal arts at Slippery Rock University, and I would suggest that, Carol, it might be more a relationship with your dean than the placement. In my college, our dean will say every university has a history department, every university has an English department, but we are distinctive in his college, and he has clearly said, if you do well, that makes me look good, and so I'm going to help you do well. So it allows him to compete at some level with the more professional colleges, and therefore get some attention from the provost, the president, whatever. But forming that relationship with the dean, I've had deans before that I didn't have the same relationship with, and I think that's the difference really between night and day for us. One thing that I wanted to mention, I'm curious about people, if you have a very strong student organization. So we have a really strong student pre-professional association, and almost all the students in the major are involved in it, and they do lots of programming on campus from and they all are nonprofit based, right? So many nonprofits will do fundraising events. So around Halloween, every year they host cupcakes for a cause, sort of a play for your favorite charity. And so we have teams from all across the campus that are playing for their favorite charity. And then the top 3 teams that win the cupcake contest, if you will, they get to give the money to the charity of their choice. And so back to that, people start knowing who we are, and, oh, you're those people. And when the students organize an event like that, they're practicing what they're learning. They're learning how to deal with the bumps that happen in those kind of events. And at the same time, they have learned very clearly how to set up an info booth at that event and drag people over to say, you can do this for a living. So our students have really been probably our greatest champions, and empowering them and sort of taking the risk to let them be our voice has really helped us, to the extent that about 5 years ago, the students who had been in the fundraising class said, we talk about annual campaigns, and we put together an annual campaign packet and materials for the clients that we have in our class. Why don't we do an annual campaign for ourselves? And so the first year, the students, we worked with Alumni Association, we worked with their families, they did the brochure, the letter, they did it the way it was supposed to be done, and they raised $10,000. And since then, every year we've raised between $10,000 and $18,000, and that's scholarships for students for internships and semester scholarships. So the students have really taken an investment in this. And when it comes to marketing, they tell their friends instead of just me telling other students. We could not do anything here without the advocacy of our students. It's been amazing.
Congratulations, Alice. That sounds absolutely fantastic. I'm hoping we're on that cusp as well, because we just recently got for example, a student group on campus, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and they're very active, and we've already hosted a joint event with them. And so exactly as you say, trying to get the students now to be the advocates, you know, and we've got some graduates coming back to do their of the undergraduate program, coming back to do graduate school. They too have signed on to be our advocates in the space that we're in. So yeah,
and
it's very exciting.
in the middle of COVID, they couldn't do as many direct service and those kind of activities. So they decided to put together a series of professional development series. And so our program just celebrated its 25th year of having an undergraduate program here. But the students put together these professional development workshops once every other week, where we brought in alums, and we did it via Zoom, where the alums we called it the Change the World series. And so kind of building off of that Gen Z desire to make a difference. And we picked topics that would be interesting to students outside of our department. So for example, one of them was working with children and youth. Another one was working in arts and museums and the humanities. And so then we blasted those departments about, hey, want to send your students to this to learn how do they get jobs in these areas. But it was our alums who were talking about, and in my program, I learned this. So that was another really interesting way to have the students, the alums and the students connect, you know, to network, but also to really drive interest across the majors. And I think we pulled probably 4 second majors from those events that took place this spring. And they were really easy to do because the students do them.
So I hate to cut off this amazing discussion, but we are over time.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people have to run on to their next meeting. If you joined us late, this meeting is recorded and we will have it up and available on YouTube. We will for sure have another webinar because this is so helpful information. So thank you so much, Peter and Carol, and everyone who participated and attended today. Next month, Alicia Schlademan from Northern Illinois University will be bringing a panel of community organization participants and talking about how NIU does community engagement work. So this is also related to what we were talking about today. And I think their nonprofit program is highly involved in the community. So that should be an informative discussion. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with Nicole or myself. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.